Hey everyone, it's Professor Cokkinos. So this is the third unit in mass communications, the book. Very interesting. The book is a interesting form of mass communications. It's sent out to the masses, but yet it's such a personal experience. I mean, you get a book, you hold it in your hand. It's very tactile. You can touch it. Very unique, titles, very niche kind of marketing. There could be, bestsellers that everybody's reading, or, you're really interested in a certain ethnic cuisine and you want to get a book about that. You can really customize it and really personalize the book experience. So let's take a little look at the history here. Everybody knows the Gutenberg Bible, right? So Johannes Gutenberg invented this printing press, and the first book that was ever printed was the Bible. In fact, a lot of the first books were religious in their nature. When the colonists came over, they brought a printing press about 18 years after the landing at Plymouth Rock. And the first book printed in the colonies was the whole book of Psalms, another religious title. The idea that the British were trying to control everything, obviously, and censor. And so they had this thing called the Stamp Act, where any of the colonial presses had to use their paper that was stamped, and they had to pay extra for it. The British were trying to recoup money that, from the wars with the French, and the colonists, some of them were arrested, like Ben Franklin's brother. Books also fueled the anti-British sentiment. So you had Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and lots of pamphlets were being written against British rule, colonial rule. And then after the War of Independence, printing really became a cultural influence on the Americas. So books were still pretty expensive. It was a luxury, really, to have a book. Back before the printing press, books were really expensive. You had scribes who were actually writing, copying books by hand. Imagine that, right? And they did the artwork and the lettering and everything, done usually by monks. The revolution came with technology. There was the Linotype machine, which you see in the center here. That was a way to set type with a kind of keyboard. And then the big revolution was offset printing. And the picture on the right is this idea of offset printing, where ink is applied to paper by these plates. And it can be done very, very rapidly. So newspapers and anything that's mass-produced can really benefit from this offset technology. Then we had the flowering of the novel. So in the 1860s, the idea of a dime novel that you could buy at a train station and take with you and read it on the train. The paperback kind of pulp fiction, right? So very inexpensive, kind of short reads, light reading, kind of really popularized the paperback. And paperbacks then became the big thing. In 1935, Alan Lane founded Penguin Books, and they're still around today, right? So Penguin is one of the big publishers. Today, most of the books that are sold are paperback books. And then think about the impact of the book, right? So the cultural impact of the book. It's a way a lot of us learned, I mean, you were hopefully reading your textbook, and, it's one way to kind of culture, a lot of culture, a look into the past, history books, personal development. A lot of us might, read a book on something like I want to learn about web design, and I want to learn how to exercise or cook right and be healthy. And then the idea of, I gave you guys an assignment to think about bibliotherapy, how you might have used books during the pandemic. I read a lot more titles, obviously, with all that time on your hands. So the idea of this kind of individualization. And there's an interesting thing in the book. It talks about, how artificial intelligence and technology is changing everything. But people who are book literate will always have a jump on the job market. Libraries, books in libraries, social infrastructure, the idea that you could go to a library democratically, pick various titles, you could meet someone there, it's kind of like a cheap date, right? Here I am at the library, meet you at the library later, right? Study with friends. So a library became kind of a community, right? Going to the library was a social experience. And then we have the idea of censorship. So book banning, the Nazis burned books, and there's a famous novel by Ray Bradbury called Fahrenheit 451, and it's all about how gatekeepers, the gatekeeping function in mass communication, could stop and start the flow of information, and one thing they did was burn books. Fahrenheit 451 comes from the idea that at that temperature, a paper book will burst into flames. A great movie if you haven't seen it. And then other books that were banned, sometimes, great titles were banned, To Kill a Mockingbird, Of Mice and Men, even the Harry Potter series, banned in schools and other places. A lot of these things will obviously change and shift. Then the concept of alliteracy. Alliteracy is this idea that you know how to read, but you choose not to. So you're actually limiting yourself when you do this. So you might play a video game like this young guy is doing instead of reading a book. But I would say do both. If you look at some of the statistics here, reading is down, and I know you guys know it. You're more likely to read stuff on your phone or the internet. But, book publishing is still a powerful force in mass communications and mass media. There are lots of categories. Some people would be in a book club. You guys are reading your textbook, higher education, mail order books, mass market, paperbacks, paperback writers, professional trade books, that are dedicated to specific industries, religious texts, lots of different kind of niche categories. And then the convergence. So how do the other media affect books? Well, the idea of the internet and books coming together in an ebook. And we have, the Read Anywhere app that I told you guys about. You could download your mass communication text to your phone or your tablet, and you could have access to it anywhere. So, that technology is there. And then the idea of it being available on any platform. So you could have a Kindle, you could have a iPad, any phone you could read your book on, or even listen to it. More convenient, right? Maybe you can't read a book while you're driving. So the idea of listening to your book in certain situations where you can't actually read it. So the industry has changed a lot. It was a cottage industry before conglomeration. There were a lot of small publishing houses. Today they've all been bought out by a couple of big conglomerates. So what's the problem with this? The idea, we talked about the same thing last week. The monopolization of culture, and we want to make it democratic so that everyone has access. But in a lot of ways too, there are these very niche kind of publishers. So there's the idea that there's a book for everyone, and then the cross between books and movies. So a lot of movies, start out as books and they're, rewritten for the screen. And they even go the other way. There's, great TV series that you might even have a book coming out of that. So kind of goes both ways. But the bottom line is, money has to be made. So wherever it can be made, that will kind of give opportunities. Today, you could be your own publisher, right? The small press. There are a number of smaller presses, but the idea of electronic publishing where you might be writing a blog, right? So you're kind of writing your own book online, and you're updating it in a daily, weekly, monthly fashion. So lots of interesting kind of opportunities there. And the idea of Harry Potter, how does that affect the overall cultural balance and the democracy of the media, where you're looking at a book like that is so popular that it really kind of everyone knows it. It's almost a catchphrase, right?